So we took the exhaust and everything off, and now we're cleaning the car. It's always nice to do that. Obviously, hasn't seen much use. And yeah, typical Corvette stuff. Started by pulling out the radiator and all that stuff. Obviously the wiring harness, as you guys know, I had to like fix that, repair that. The one difficult one is the one that goes all the way down to the AC. It's hard to tell, but it like goes like right there to the AC compressor. So that one's kind of hard to reach. The rest is pretty simple. And yeah, really happy with that radiator setup though. That's where you guys can see the oil cooler. I just never really finished it off with like paint and whatever, but like we'll do that because it was all just prototype face. That's the radiator right there. Hellcat fan on a triple flow 19 by 28 inch radiator. I want to make these hoses because now they're just pieced together with like part store hoses. But yeah, so far so good. Took the intake off and obviously sealed off the ports over there. I put everything in Ziploc bags. Obviously the ignition coils are the same left and right, but it can't really hurt. This is the way I like to do it. Take the intake off first, then the belt and the alternator, because without the alternator off you cannot take that last coil off with these valve covers, and it's a little easier to undo the whole wiring harness when all that stuff is off. I'm going to be replacing this guy because it looks a little sketch. And although I know exactly where they go, and although you can't really mess up, I still mark everything just to be sure. I mean, I always say to people, I could be in a hospital or something could be up with me. So just mark everything because you don't know what happens. And to be honest, like, you never know what happens, right? You can be working on this motor and you can be like, oh man, this motor's too far gone. I'm going to go for like a crazy motor. It's going to take a couple more months. So just leave all that stuff. Like, it takes 2 seconds to put the labels on. Also, if you take the fuel thing off, like I want to put like a nice cap on here, but I got to go grab them. Make sure no shit gets in that fuel line. After that, the spark plugs come out, the headers come out. And yeah, it's a little easier to get to like the NOx sensors when the headers are off, the connectors for the NOx sensors. And yeah, making pretty good progress. And yeah, everything gets labeled and gets thrown in the bag. And I also make this one of these was touched by the, as you can see, by the headers. So we're going to get a new one or a new set, but I make a little list of that in my phone, everything I take off that doesn't look good or that I want to replace, like these harnesses. One of the harnesses for the ignition coils doesn't really look good, like they messed with that over here, not original, so I'm just going to grab a new one for those. And one of the plugs was bad on the extension for the Lambda sensor, so I'm going to get a new extension for that as well. But keep everything nice and organized, and yeah, you'll love yourself for that later. Pulling off all the accessories over here. Power steering pump, obviously not the same as stock. I have a dash fitting over here, a dash 10 that feeds the pump, dash over there, a dash 6 on the feed line, a dash 8 on the return. I kept the oil filter lines over there, and there's the cooler for the power steering, and my super cool power steering reservoir that I recommend everybody, but nobody uses it because it's so big. It's over here, and super convenient because it fits in these drain pans. Just drain it out, leave as much of the dash lines on it as possible so you don't have to mess with the orientation later. And yeah, obviously in California, super nice to work outside for a European, something really special. So super cool when we're getting somewhere with this. Obviously you can do things a lot faster if you just rattle it apart like I did before on some cars when there's like a lot of stress. But right now we're just cleaning everything, documenting everything, and obviously putting everything nicely in these labeled boxes. So I label them before I take stuff off: power steering pump, alternator support. Then we start taking them off. That's all a number 15 socket for all this stuff. The pump is obviously a little bit fiddly. You gotta get the 13 millimeters that are between the pulley. This is obviously the turn one, the larger pulley. So your socket goes in between and the power steering pump comes off. It's nice that this can all stay on there, and the pressure line over here, the R6 pressure line, can also stay on the pump. So again, you don't have to mess with the orientation of all that. It just comes off and goes back on the way it was. The improved racing adapter and the American Racing headers 2-inch came off pretty easily. I take this adapter, probably leave the adapter on, take the dash lines off, although that's not the easiest task because they're pretty close to one another. But as you can see, this is all a little tight. From the build video, you guys probably remember that this sensor is really close. This NOx sensor is pretty close to those lines. It certainly doesn't work like stock, but yeah, here we go. These guys come off. Oh, so much of that small stuff, obviously. As you can see, I rerouted these. Ooh, thank God didn't go in that pan. I rerouted these things. This clip I put upside down. Normally it sits the other way around, otherwise it doesn't fit with the improved adapter. And that one's a little charred. It's dripping a lot out of these lines. It's good, I guess. Pretty nice. And there's a bunch of grounds. Same with that 15mm bolt. Those grounds come off. There's your crank sensor, the gray one. The earlier ones have a black connector, and that's the connector for the starter motor. As you can see, it's kind of flimsy and they often break off on these cars, so be careful with that. And obviously here we have the oil level sensor as well. That goes over there. Kind of hard to tell, goes over there. Yep. So a second round of cleaning after removing all that stuff like the headers and whatever. It's nice to clean over here, and when you're pulling out the motor, it's nice to clean out your floor space, because if there's like the smallest thing, your cherry picker wheels are not gonna like that. So just clean up your workstation once you're ready to pull the motor out. Obviously clean over here around the torque tube bolts. You're gonna have to come out over there, and I'm gonna try to pull the engine out with the bolts, or with the bell housing still attached. Obviously over here, nice and clean. Probably going to take the motor mount bolts off so it doesn't have to come up to go out of that thing. So just take these off, and maybe take the whole thing off before we cherry pick it off. It's going to be difficult because obviously you want to do this from below, and that's not easy with the cherry picker on top. Yes, everything nice and clean over here. Obviously be careful with like the clutch line that's over there, and brake lines, although we're not using those brake lines, but make sure you're not damaging them with the headers and whatnot. So there you got your fuel lines and evap line coming through over there, so that's all really close to the bell housing. And yeah, so that's going to be the next thing, to pull this guy out. And obviously we're going to take the rack off, so clean the rack a little bit more with the water pump and everything out. There's a lot more room right there to pull that rack out of the car. It's going to give you a lot more room. We're also going to be lowering these guys, lower the subframe a little bit. I'm going to put a different subframe in because this is like painted black. So you guys can see, I don't know why, somebody messed with it a little bit. So yeah, I'm just going to grab like a different one that we have, like a nice fresh one that we know that's 100% correct and not messed with. Yeah, so this is obviously nice stuff to send out to powder coating once you're pulling everything apart. And the glorious Wisefab Narrow, love it so much, so awesome. Take off the shifter knob, which in my case has a little Allen, and make sure that that whole thing can drop through easily to the bottom when you're dropping the torque tube out. So these cars, once you take the battery off, it's impossible to get the doors to come open. So what I did is I made a little wire over here. If I pull that, then the door comes open. It's just attached right over there. because once the battery is disconnected, then the doors don't open anymore. So nice little trick right over there. Just leave the window open. It's a slight bit so it can come through. In order to drop the whole rear subframe over there, there's a ground. Obviously, a lot of stuff needs to come off. I'm just going to leave my caliper on the car so I don't have to mess with the brakes, because that original brake line, as you can see, we're not using anymore. And that's the brake line that we made for the hydraulic inline handbrake. Everything else obviously has to come off. The upper control arm, the shock, all that stuff. That's the starter wires. They go up here on the battery, at least on my car. There's a T over there, and the T runs all the way up here, and that goes to the battery box over there, or like the fuse box over there. That's the quick connectors for the AC lines. Here's another one that goes down there. That one also goes with the wiring loom. And that's the negative post for the battery. And that's obviously, I changed this around a little bit because I placed my ECU a little bit higher up. There's also another connector, bunch of connectors over there. These are all not like factory, because I had to redo them because they were bad on my car. So those are Deutsch. So in order to drop everything down, you got to get this guy out as well. Actually, this guy. So you take all these clips off where the top of the fuse box latches on over here, and then you use a number 7 to get all these bolts out, and then these guys will come off to the bottom. And yeah, that's how it works. So sadly, they all need to come off for only one, which is that one over here. Somebody did something with the wire. I don't even know what that was for. Somebody did that on my car somehow. It runs great without it. If any of you guys have any idea what that wire is, I can obviously look it up, but I don't know. It's gonna be fine. This guy comes off, and yeah, that way you can take those wires off and pull the whole thing out from underneath. Obviously, this whole bundle of wires for the starter and all that stuff also has a ground over there. So if you want to take the whole thing out, you got to take that ground off that's over there as well. This is kind of nice because then this whole thing gone, and I kind of want to do that because I want to get rid of the battery up front. It's going to be a little easier if you take that guy off, which is on the firewall. Take this whole thing loose. As you can see, these guys, basically this is what you're after. This gray connector and your ECU connectors and all that stuff over there. There's a bunch of things over there that I marked. A couple of these stake wires, and all that stuff needs to come loose. Actually, that one I think does not even have to come loose. By the looks of it, that one can go back together. A little bit of AC oil on there. And yeah, so all this stuff needs to come out when you drop the engine and torque tube and all that stuff down in one go. So it's all attached to there. It's very hard to get off the torque tube, so all has to come down. So as with a lot of these things, you got to plan a little bit. It's time to call it quits for today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull off the brake lines and let those drip overnight. So when I come back tomorrow, all the brake fluid will be out. I already took a pump to the reservoir and took everything out from the reservoir. So the reservoir itself is empty. However, yeah, that's the feed line that comes from the reservoir, goes like that, goes over here. So we're gonna take that off because everything else is still on the subframe. As you guys remember, I made this the other time when I was here about a year ago. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And then obviously we're going to be cleaning shit like this. It's just nice to have it all clean and nice once it's out of the car. So it's a pretty big ordeal. On the other hand, it wasn't the nicest car to start with. So it's nice to do all these things and have everything nice and clean and go through it all together. And a lot of people say like, oh, why didn't you just buy a nicer one? Well, my buddy Chris Finch had the nicest one I'd ever seen. And he also had like insane problems with it. So there's no difference. Like, it's always going to be work. These cars are all old. So yeah, they're gonna need a bunch of work. So I'd rather buy like a cheap one and then do all the work rather than buy. Chris had like the nicest low mileage Z06 I'd ever seen, and he had huge problems, even like connectors falling apart and whatever. So having a super nice one really doesn't mean anything, and I wanted to cut everything up for the 945 body and everything. So still happy with this car. Going well. That's dripping out right there. So I have all my stuff right over there, all these things. You can hear them drip, so that's kind of nice. Also, the brake clean is like so aggressive that it'll actually clean up your little pan. So yeah, I don't hate having brake clean in my oil pans. And there you go, you can see it leaking all down. Yeah. So by the time we're here tomorrow, it's gonna be all gone, hopefully.